We are all strangers in a strange land, longing for home, but not quite knowing what or where home is. We glimpse it sometimes in our dreams, or as we turn a corner, and suddenly there is a strange, sweet familiarity that vanishes almost as soon as it comes. There's a particular kind of silence that follows the question, "Where are you from?" For some, the answer comes easily. A place, a lineage, a story that threads back through generations. But for others, the question hangs in the air like smoke, shapeless and impossible to grasp. The orphan knows this silence. Not just the child without parents, but anyone who has ever felt the ground beneath them shift, who has looked around and realized they don't quite fit the shape of the world they're standing in. The orphan is not merely a circumstance of birth, it's a condition of the soul, a psychological state that millions carry, often without knowing its name. It's the feeling of being unmoored, of searching for something that was never quite there to begin with, and yet the search continues. Because deep in the human psyche, there exists a wound that refuses to close, a question that refuses to be silenced. Where do I belong? This isn't just a question for those who grew up without families. It's a question that echoes through foster homes and suburban living rooms alike. It appears in the executive who climbs every ladder but feels empty at the top, in the immigrant who speaks 2 languages but feels at home in neither, in the adolescent who looks in the mirror and sees a stranger. The orphan archetype lives wherever there is disconnection from origin, from self, and from the world. Throughout human history, the orphan has appeared again and again in our stories. From Moses floating in a basket down the Nile, to Harry Potter living under the stairs, to Batman watching his parents die in an alley. These are not just tales of tragedy, they are maps of transformation. The orphan's journey is humanity's journey, a descent into loss and a climb toward meaning, and the destination is never what we expect. To understand the orphan is to understand a fundamental fracture in human consciousness. We are born whole, or so we believe, connected to mother, to source, to the infinite, and then something happens. We are separated, cut loose, cast out. Sometimes it's literal abandonment, death, displacement. Sometimes it's metaphorical, the shattering of innocence, the end of childhood, the moment we realize our parents are not gods, but flawed human beings stumbling through the dark just like everyone else. The psychologist Erik Erikson spoke of the first stage of human development as trust versus mistrust. The infant, helpless and dependent, must learn whether the world is a safe place, whether needs will be met, whether connection is possible. For the orphan, literal or psychological, this foundational trust is damaged or never forms at all. The world becomes a place of uncertainty, a place where belonging must be earned rather than given, where home is something you build rather than something you're born into. Carl Jung understood the orphan as one of the primary archetypes dwelling in the collective unconscious. The orphan is not just a personal experience, but a universal pattern, a psychological motif that recurs across cultures and centuries. In Jungian terms, the orphan represents the ego's separation from the self, that original wholeness we carry before consciousness divides us. We begin as one undifferentiated, merged with everything. Then comes awareness, and with it, exile. The price of consciousness is loneliness. But here's where it gets interesting. The orphan is not a dead end, it's a beginning. Every hero's journey starts with severance. Luke Skywalker loses his aunt and uncle, Frodo loses the Shire, Cinderella loses her mother. The orphan is the archetype of potential, of latent power waiting to be discovered precisely because everything familiar has been stripped away. When you have nothing to lose, you have everything to gain. When you belong nowhere, you can go anywhere. In fairy tales, which Jung's colleague Marie-Louise von Franz considered the purest expressions of unconscious psychological processes, the orphan almost always wins. The youngest son, dismissed and forgotten, becomes the king. The abandoned child, lost in the forest, discovers magic. The unwanted girl finds her voice and transforms the kingdom. The pattern is consistent. Loss precedes transformation. Exile precedes enlightenment. You have to be cast out before you can truly come home. Ancient mythology understood this deeply. The Greek hero Perseus was cast into the sea as an infant, locked in a chest with his mother. He survived and grew to slay Medusa and rescue Andromeda. Oedipus was abandoned on a mountainside with pierced feet. His name literally means swollen foot, and yet he became a king, though his story warns us that running from fate only ensures we meet it head-on. Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome, were abandoned as infants and raised by a she-wolf. The orphan becomes the architect of civilization itself. Even in religious traditions, the orphan appears as a sacred figure. Jesus, though born to Mary, is raised in a world that doesn't understand him, constantly at odds with authority, homeless in spirit if not in fact. The Buddha leaves his palace and family, making himself an orphan by choice, seeking truth beyond the comfort of belonging. Muhammad was orphaned as a child, losing first his father, then his mother, then his grandfather. And yet from this loss came a revelation that would reshape the world. There's a psychological truth here that cannot be ignored. The orphan is forced to develop self-reliance. Without the safety net of belonging, without the comfort of unconditional acceptance, the orphan must create an identity from scratch. This is both a curse and a gift. The curse is loneliness, the ache of disconnection, and the constant fear that you are not enough. The gift is freedom, the ability to reinvent yourself, to choose your family rather than inherit one, and to define your own meaning rather than accept what's given. Modern psychology recognizes attachment theory as foundational to human development. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth demonstrated that the quality of early bonds shapes our entire relational lives. Secure attachment creates confident adults who trust others and themselves. Insecure attachment, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, creates adults who struggle, who either cling desperately or push away, and who cannot quite believe they are worthy of love. The orphan, literal or metaphorical, often carries insecure attachment into adulthood. The search for belonging becomes a lifelong quest. But here's what the research also shows. Attachment patterns are not destiny. Healing is possible. New relationships can create new neural pathways. Earned security, the ability to process and integrate early trauma, can be achieved through self-reflection, therapy, and meaningful connections. The orphan can find home, but the journey requires facing the wound rather than running from it. You cannot belong anywhere until you belong to yourself. In contemporary culture, the orphan archetype has exploded. Superhero narratives dominate our entertainment, and nearly every superhero is an orphan. Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, after his parents' death, Black Widow, Wolverine, the list goes on. Why? Because the orphan resonates with something deep in the modern psyche. We live in an age of disconnection. Traditional structures, family, community, religion have fractured. We are orphaned from meaning itself, searching for something to anchor us in a world that changes too fast to hold on to. The rise of chosen family narratives speaks to this hunger. From Friends to the Fast and the Furious franchise, from found family tropes in fan fiction to the way millennials and Gen Z describe their friend groups, there's a recognition that biology doesn't determine belonging. We are building new kinship structures, creating networks of meaning that transcend blood. The orphan is learning that family is not something you're born into, but something you create. Still, the ache remains. Studies on loneliness reveal an epidemic, particularly in developed nations where individualism is prized. We are more connected than ever through technology, and yet more isolated. Social media offers the illusion of belonging while deepening the sense that everyone else has found their tribe and you're still on the outside looking in. The orphan scrolls through images of other people's families, other people's celebrations, and other people's homes, and feels the absence like a weight in the chest. The search for belonging takes many forms. Some seek it in romantic relationships, projecting onto a partner the fantasy of unconditional acceptance, only to discover that no human being can fill the void left by a broken origin. Some seek it in work, in achievement, in building something meaningful, hoping that success will finally prove they deserve a place in the world. Some seek it in substances, in temporary obliterations of the self, in anything that makes the loneliness stop for a moment, others turn inward. Meditation, therapy, spiritual practice. The recognition that belonging is not a destination, but a state of being, not something external, but something cultivated within. This is the wisdom tradition across cultures. The Sufis speak of the beloved, the divine presence that is always with us, closer than our jugular vein. Buddhism teaches that separation is an illusion, that we are already interconnected with all beings. The mystics of every tradition point to the same truth: you are never truly alone. You only believe you are. But belief is a stubborn thing. The orphan knows intellectually that connection is possible, that wholeness is the natural state, and that separation is a trick of the mind. And yet the feeling persists. The wound has its own logic, its own truth that cannot be reasoned away. This is where the work begins. Not in trying to fill the void, but in learning to sit with it, to befriend it, to understand what it's trying to teach. Jungian analyst James Hollis writes about the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of disconnection, the ache for what we don't have. Solitude is the capacity to be alone without needing to flee from oneself. The orphan must learn solitude, must learn that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. That in the quiet, in the stillness, there is a presence that was always there, waiting to be noticed. This brings us to the concept of the inner orphan, the part of ourselves that feels unloved, unwanted, and cast aside. Not everyone has experienced literal abandonment, but nearly everyone has experienced emotional abandonment at some point. The moment a parent was too busy, too stressed, or too caught in their own pain to see you. The moment you needed comfort and received criticism instead. The moment you shared something precious and were met with indifference. These moments accumulate, creating an inner orphan that lives in the shadows, believing it is too much or not enough, that its needs are burdensome, and that love must be earned through perfection. Carl Jung spoke of shadow work, the process of integrating the rejected parts of ourselves. The inner orphan is often shadow material, hidden because it's too painful to acknowledge. We project strength, independence, and self-sufficiency, all while the orphan inside weeps for connection. The healing comes when we can turn toward that wounded part, when we can offer ourselves the compassion we never received. This is reparenting, a therapeutic concept where we become the loving parent to our own inner child, offering the acceptance and belonging that was missing. But this work is not easy. It requires descending into grief, into rage, into all the feelings we've been avoiding. The orphan must mourn what was lost before it can embrace what is possible. Grief is not just sadness, it's a form of love, an acknowledgement that something mattered, that its absence leaves a hole. To grieve properly is to honor both the loss and the love, to say, this was important, this hurt, and I survived. There's a paradox in the orphan's journey. The search for belonging often takes us away from home, into the wilderness, into the unknown. We think we're looking for a place or a person or a community that will finally accept us, but what we're really searching for is ourselves. The part of us that was left behind when we learned to adapt, to perform, to be who others needed us to be. The journey is not about finding belonging out there. It's about finding the parts of ourselves we abandoned in order to survive. Joseph Campbell's hero's journey maps this beautifully. The hero starts in the ordinary world, receives a call to adventure, and crosses the threshold into the unknown. There are trials, allies, enemies, and a descent into the deepest cave where the greatest fear lives. And then, if the hero survives, there is a return. But the return is not to the same place. The hero comes back transformed, carrying a gift, a wisdom that can heal the community. The orphan who completes the journey returns not as a victim, but as a guide, someone who knows the territory of loss and can help others navigate it. This is why orphan stories matter. They are not just tales of suffering, they are blueprints for transformation. They tell us that loss is not the end, but the beginning, that exile is the path to discovery, that the wound is where the light enters, as Rumi said. The orphan's journey gives meaning to pain, transforms victimhood into agency, and replaces "why me" with "what now?" Literature is filled with orphans who become heroes, not despite their loss, but because of it. Jane Eyre, orphaned and abused, becomes a woman of fierce independence and moral clarity. Pip in Great Expectations learns that belonging cannot be bought, that authenticity matters more than status. Anne of Green Gables, unwanted and overlooked, creates family through sheer force of imagination and love. These characters resonate because they mirror something true about the human condition. We are all, in some sense, orphans searching for home. Even in horror, the orphan archetype appears, though twisted. The monster is often an orphan too, Frankenstein's creature, rejected by his creator, longing for connection and turned violent by isolation. Dracula, eternally alone, creates progeny out of desperation for companionship. The horror of the orphan is the horror of what happens when the need for belonging is denied, when the wound is allowed to fester. It's a warning. Connection is not optional. It's essential to our humanity. Anthropologically, humans evolved as tribal creatures. Our ancestors survived because they belonged to groups, because they cooperated, and because exclusion from the tribe meant death. This is why ostracism hurts so deeply, why solitary confinement is considered torture, and why the silent treatment can devastate. Our brains are wired for connection. The orphan is fighting against millions of years of evolutionary programming that says belonging equals survival. And yet, in the modern world, we've created systems that breed orphans, economic structures that value profit over people, leaving workers feeling like cogs in a machine. Social structures that prioritize competition over collaboration, that sort us into hierarchies of worth, political structures that divide rather than unite, that create us versus them narratives. We are collectively orphaned from community, from meaning, and from each other. The philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote about worldlessness, the state of being cut off from a common world, from shared meaning, and from mutual recognition. She observed this in totalitarian regimes, where individuals become isolated atoms, unable to trust or connect. But worldlessness can happen in democracies too, in any system, where people are reduced to functions rather than recognized as whole human beings. The orphan is not just personal. It's political, social, and existential. So what is the answer? How does the orphan find belonging in a world that seems designed to prevent it? The truth is uncomfortable. There is no singular answer, no destination where belonging is finally achieved and maintained forever. Belonging is not a place, it's a practice. A daily choice to show up, to be vulnerable, to risk rejection in pursuit of connection. It's messy and imperfect and ongoing. Some find belonging in activism, in fighting alongside others for a cause larger than themselves. The sense of shared purpose creates bonds that transcend difference. Some find it in creativity, in making art that speaks to others, in the strange intimacy of being seen and understood through work. Some find it in nature, in the recognition that we belong to something much older and vaster than human civilization. Some find it in spirituality, in the direct experience of connection to the divine, however they define it. And some find it in therapy, in the gradual reconstruction of self-worth through relationship with someone who listens without judgment. The therapeutic relationship is itself a form of belonging, a space where the orphan can finally be seen, the psychologist D.W. Winnicott spoke of holding, the way a good enough mother holds the infant, creating safety for growth. Therapy, at its best, recreates this holding, allows the client to be held psychologically so they can learn to hold themselves. But beyond individual solutions, there's a collective dimension. Creating cultures of belonging requires systemic change. It requires communities that prioritize inclusion over exclusion, that create spaces where difference is celebrated rather than punished. It requires economic systems that value care work, that recognize that humans need more than material survival. It requires challenging the narratives that tell us we must be exceptional to be worthy, that belonging is something earned rather than a birthright. The orphan's search for belonging is ultimately a search for the self. Not the self we've been told to be, not the self that adapts and performs and pleases, but the authentic self that was there before the wound, or perhaps was created through the wound. This self is not found in a place or a person. It's found in the willingness to be, fully and unapologetically, whoever you actually are. Belonging starts with self-belonging. This is where the journey comes full circle. The orphan who leaves home in search of belonging eventually realizes that home is not back where they started. You can't go back to innocence once it's lost. But you can create a new home, one built on awareness rather than ignorance, on choice rather than accident. The return is not a return at all. It's an arrival at a place you've never been, though it feels mysteriously familiar. In the Sufi tradition, there's a story of a man who travels the world searching for treasure, only to return home and find it buried in his own backyard. He had to make the journey and had to search everywhere else in order to finally look where he started. The orphan's journey is like this. We search the world for belonging, for home, for the missing piece that will make us whole. And sometimes we find it. But often, we find that what we were searching for was already within us, waiting patiently for us to stop running long enough to notice. Marie-Louise von Franz wrote that fairy tales often end with marriage, with the hero finding their true love and living happily ever after. But she pointed out that marriage in fairy tales is symbolic. It represents the union of opposites, the integration of masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, and self and other. The orphan finds belonging when they integrate the parts of themselves that were split off, when they marry the inner and outer worlds, and when they recognize that they are both individual and interconnected, both separate and part of the whole. This is the psychological resolution of the orphan archetype. Not finding someone or something external to complete you, but recognizing that you are already complete. The wound remains, the history cannot be changed, but the meaning can shift. From I am broken to I was broken and I survived. From I don't belong anywhere to I belong to myself, and that is enough to begin. There's a Jewish concept called tikkun olam, repairing the world. The idea that the world is broken, and each of us has a responsibility to heal it through our actions. The orphan who transforms their pain into compassion, who uses their experience of exclusion to create inclusion for others, participates in tikkun olam. The wound becomes a gift, not because suffering is good, but because the person who has suffered deeply and survived has something to offer those still in the darkness. This is the final stage of the orphan's journey, from victim to survivor to thriver to guide. The one who is lost becomes the one who helps others find their way. The one who is excluded creates spaces of belonging. The one who felt worthless discovers that their experience, their pain, and their survival matter deeply, not in spite of being an orphan, but because of it. In the end, the orphan archetype teaches us something essential about the human condition. We are born alone, and we die alone, and in between, we long for connection. This longing is not weakness. It's the engine of growth, the force that drives us out of isolation and toward each other. Every friendship, every love, every community is an attempt to bridge the gap, to touch across the void, to say, I see you, you are not alone. The orphan knows the void intimately, knows its dimensions, its darkness, its terror. And precisely because of this, the orphan also knows the value of connection, the preciousness of being seen, and the miracle of being chosen. We don't know what we have until we lose it. The orphan has lost, and therefore knows what it means to find. So perhaps the search for belonging is not about finding a place where we fit perfectly, where all wounds are healed and all needs are met. Perhaps it's about learning to live with the longing, to carry it not as a burden but as a compass, always pointing us toward connection, toward love, toward home. And perhaps home is not a destination at all. Perhaps it's the journey itself, the search, the reaching out, the moments of recognition when you meet another traveler on the path and realize, for just a moment, that you are not alone. That we are all orphans, that we are all searching, that we are all, in the end, trying to find our way back to something we never really lost, because it was inside us all along. The orphan looks up at the stars and feels small, insignificant, and lost in the vastness. But the stars look back and whisper a secret. You are made of the same stuff as stars. You are the universe experiencing itself. You belong to everything because you are everything. The wound is real. The loss is real. The pain is real. But so is the connection. So is the possibility. So is the strange, persistent hope that somewhere, somehow, there is a home waiting to be discovered or created or remembered. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the search itself is the belonging, the willingness to keep looking, keep reaching, and keep believing that connection is possible, even when every experience says otherwise. The orphan who keeps searching has not lost. They have chosen hope over despair, possibility over resignation, and love over fear. And in that choice, they belong to something greater than any family or place or identity could provide. They belong to the human story itself, to the endless, eternal reaching toward each other across the darkness, saying, "Are you there? I am here. Let us be lost together. Let us find our way home."